on the News Channel 5 network. This is MorningLine with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on Morning Line. Nick Barris here on a Thursday, and we've got a good show on tap. We're going to be covering a couple of subjects for you, and we're going to take your phone calls as well throughout the program. Later in the show, as we go for the last few segments, we're going to be joined by Dr. Friday, our financial expert again. We're going to get into some details on some new developments with regard to where things are looking in regard to a possible second stimulus check payment, all right? And at the same time, we can also take some of your questions and comments for those of you, and I know there are many out there still waiting for their stimulus check, or some of you also concerned about still not getting your unemployment benefits. And so we can try to help you. You can call in. We'll get the number up. Doc Friday will be answering that. But we do have some new information with regard to the possibility of some type of other stimulus payment. But before we get to all that, a lot going on in this pandemic that relates to families and children and returning to school and what's safe for kids and what's not. And who better to talk about some of these issues that we're dealing with right now than those with the fantastic organization, Our Kids. And the executive director, Sue White, joins us now, along with forensic social worker. That would be Lisa Milam. And good morning to you both. Can you hear me?
Good morning. Yes. Good morning.
It's good to see you, and thank you so much. You know, I was wondering about organizations like yours during the pandemic, and maybe, Sue, you can fill this in, and I always like to give you a chance to remind folks exactly what Our Kids is all about. But, you know, how you've been operating during this pandemic, Sue, and fill us in on that.
Thank you so much, Nick. So Our Kids provides medical evaluations and crisis counseling in response to concerns about child sexual abuse. So COVID-19 has had a real impact on how we deliver services. And between March 11th and probably the beginning of May, we were limiting our services to only emergencies. And so we were still having conversations and taking calls from referral sources and concerned caregivers and parents. And you know, we've had to change our processes in the building. We're wiping everything down. The most important thing to us is the safety of the children and families that we serve. And since, I believe, May 11th, we are now scheduling full clinics, and we are seeing many children. Our numbers are way up, and we are thankful that the children and families that are needing our services are getting to us.
So, and when you do say your numbers are way up, I mean, do you attribute that to some of what we're seeing right now with the pandemic and more people staying home, or is there some connection there to that?
You know, one of the things that we've been saying and that we've known all along in our 33-year history is that not every child is safer at home. And I think that that's just been exacerbated by this pandemic and by sheltering in place. And I think that Lisa Milam is, she's about to finish her 28th year as forensic social worker at Our Kids. And I think that she has some real insight. She's, you know, she is, you know, the clinical team members at Our Kids, we are first responders. And whether the sexual assault happened last night or 6 months ago, it is a crisis for the family. It's traumatic for the family. And I'd love for you to, I'd like to pitch it to Lisa, because I think that she has some real insight from her clinical perspective.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Lisa. Fill us in.
Yeah, I think, and Sue's right, at this point we are seeing about a 15% increase in referrals or in kids that we're seeing. I think certainly, as Sue said, some kids are really not safer at home. Having said that, I think it's really important to also factor in that there's been a lot of education over the last few years, whether it's something from Our Kids. We've got a couple of programs or efforts to really raise community awareness with a video, What If I Told You, as well as our website. And what I've noticed in the last 6 or so weeks that we've been back up and running full time is how many kids we're seeing because someone in the home either walked in on something or somehow witnessed an event that they immediately, a parent or another adult in the home immediately intervened and acted in a protective fashion of a child. And I think it's hard to hear that we've got a huge increase or a significant increase in referrals, but it's also really encouraging that we have adults in homes who are intervening on behalf of children, because by far the most important thing for a child is for someone to intervene and to rescue that child when there is an abusive scenario. And it's devastating for families. It is very difficult for a parent to have to make that phone call that they have walked in and found either a spouse or another loved one in the home doing something sexual to a child, and yet they are finding the courage to intervene and to act on behalf of that child. And so while it's difficult to see an increase, I'm really encouraged that the community awareness campaigns that we've had appear to be at least having a positive effect.
Oh yeah, some amazing efforts there, and I think that are definitely making a difference. I was curious then from this aspect, as we've talked about before, your organization does work very closely with the district attorney's office, prosecutors in dealing with these cases as they do move forward. The thing I wondered from your take is how the courts right now are pretty much still, for the most part, shut down. I mean, and I'm wondering, have you been involved in any criminal prosecution, preparation, or anything along those lines? Do you think that's going to get up and running again sometime soon, at least from as far as you're involved?
Well, I mean, clearly, because of what we do, our primary concern is that child's health when they come into our facility. But because we also have to be mindful of investigative efforts, and that some of the information we're collecting is used for investigative purposes, then we are obviously spending a lot of time in court. You are correct that right now we are not going to court for those normal hearings or trials that are scheduled that we often get subpoenaed for. We have had a couple of emergency situations that, at least for me, I know I've had a couple that I've had to participate in where there was an emergency, with respect to protection of a child. I think the criminal court situation, it's important to understand that very few cases are actually prosecuted. Less than 5% of all cases are prosecuted. So while we do have a lot of subpoenas and we spend a lot of time in court, it is a small number. And right now, those are still postponed. Any trials or anything that we had scheduled, or we simply, they're postponed.
And if you would, real quickly, either you or Sue can answer this. When you say very few of the cases are actually prosecuted, does that mean that they are settled before they get that far? I mean, it's not like these folks that are accused of it are just getting set free.
Oh, on the contrary,
okay.
Less than 5% are ever charged in a criminal prosecution or any kind of criminal setting. The sexual abuse cases are very difficult to prosecute. Children are not, court is not a great setting for children, and the evidentiary standard required is quite high. And many times, more often than not, a sexual abuse case boils down to what a child says versus what an adult says. And rarely are there other pieces of evidence that will allow prosecution of those cases. So yeah, it's less than 5% actually have charges filed in them. But you also have to keep in mind that many cases involve allegations of abuse by a juvenile offender. Those cases are handled quite differently than cases where the alleged perpetrator is an adult. And then there are also a lot of situations where it may be a child and a child. And I think one of the things we also want to mention is just the access to online, whether it's social media or pornography, that is so easily and readily accessible and available to kids, particularly now where kids have so much more unsupervised time or free time on their hands. That there is more sexual acting out that occurs. And it's not criminal in nature, it's inappropriate, it requires intervention, and we are finding more effective ways and better ways to intervene and provide services for those kids. But when you think about how many are referred to prosecution, it's really important to understand that many of our cases involve juvenile perpetrators or children who are sexually acting out in ways that are inappropriate but not necessarily criminal.
I've got you. And I guess I'm glad you mentioned that about social media, because an awful lot of children are going to be home. Who knows? We'll see how schools play out. I mean, Sue, any recommendations that you have at this point beyond what we already know for parents and the like in terms of monitoring their kids and getting onto these, maybe pages where there's risk involved, not just, pornography or predators out there fishing, knowing kids are home and maybe lonely because they can't see their friends and they think this is our chance to take advantage of the situation?
Well, Nick, I think you're exactly right. We are just the sheer availability of pornography and the consumption of pornography is really having such a negative effect. And children don't have the perspective. It's all really bad, and it's bad for the children. Adults and caregivers have got to wake up and supervise their children on all of their technology. And people, the parents and grandparents have got to set limits. They've got to know what device, what their child is doing on the devices, and limit screen time and supervise screen time. And if they're having difficulty with that, then they need to get help. Our website is ourkidscenter.com, and we have some wonderful information on how to keep kids safe online. But it's a real dangerous world out there regarding pornography, and children don't understand, and they're very, very vulnerable to abuse, exploitation, and people have really, the eye doesn't see what the mind doesn't know. I think that was a D.H. Lawrence quote, and I think that's true. If people know it's an issue, they're going to be more vigilant. They're going to have the courage to have those difficult, ongoing conversations with their older children, their middle school children, and I think certainly people with young children can start out like they can hold out. And that means really having an understanding of how they want the rules of engagement to be in their home. Something very simple is that all handheld devices, all technology need to be in one sort of docking station. Nobody needs to be taking a tablet, a phone, or a computer into their room at night. Children aren't strong enough to unplug.
I think, Nick, one thing, and I'll take it a step farther. Sure. Kids are viewing pornography. They're sharing images of themselves that are not appropriate, and adult sex offenders are targeting those kids. That's an absolute. It's not a matter of whether or not your child is doing these things. You have to understand it is happening. And the only question is whether or not you're aware of it, how much it's going on, and you're having conversations with your children about how to understand those information, those images that they may see, or those interactions that people are having with them online. It is happening. And for parents who think their kids are not doing these things, I'm at a point where you're in a fantasy land. It is happening, and the only question is whether or not you've discovered it yet.
Gotcha. Listen, one real quick question before we have to let you both go on this. Sue, it's interesting that this pandemic and everything that came just about a month or so after Soup Sunday, which is the wonderful fundraiser that is a big part of Our Kids, and how much Our Kids means to me and how much I think of everything you guys do there. And I'm concerned not just about Our Kids, but some of these other great organizations in this city, just wondering financially, especially moving forward, and I know you have other fundraisers that are sometimes scheduled, how are you guys getting by, and what do you want to remind folks if they can give? I just want to get that out right now.
Well, thank you, Nick. And I think that Our Kids has always been blessed, and especially now with the most engaged, passionate, and resourceful and fabulous board ever. And so we are working on a virtual event that for this fall, it's going to be wonderful. And we're also pivoting. We're also working on a creative way to partner with restaurants next winter, because we know that we're not going to be going to Club Level West with all those serving cups. But we're coming up with really great ideas about how we can partner with restaurants where our kids is helped, and also the restaurants are also helped and supported. So anyone watching that wants to support the essential activities of Our Kids can go to ourkidscenter.com and tap on the donate button. And we are here for every child who needs us in Middle Tennessee. That's 47 counties. We're one of the largest clinics of our kind in the country, and we are excellent. And we're also proud to be an outpatient clinic of National General Hospital. And Nick Barris, thank you for the coverage on that wonderful project at National General last night.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, that's something Reverend Enoch Fuzz, a good friend of mine, bless him as he continues to fight cancer, and he's there behind that over at General Hospital. And so a lot of great organizations that we don't want to forget about during these times. And near the top of the list for me, of course, is Our Kids. Sue Fort White, to know you is to love you. That's just the way I feel. I'm sorry. And Lisa, you as well, but Sue will always be first in my heart. But I thank you both for joining me this morning. And let's get together again whenever you have something you need to get out there. We're here for you, all right?
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick Barris. You're a hero.
Oh, nah, not me. You guys are. Listen, Sue, darn it, get in the pool.
Thank you.
All right.
I will.
All right.
I promise.
Okay, you guys take care and be well. We're going to take a break. And by the way, Sue Fort White, like myself, is an avid swimmer, but she says she hasn't been back in the pool recently. I said, hey, get back in there. It's safe as long as you social separate. Look, we'll take a break. When we come back, folks, if you have questions or comments about a stimulus payment, about unemployment, a question about maybe a second payment coming your way, and we're going to have some new information. Tax questions as well, as we're embarking upon just a couple of months before you have to make your tax payment if you haven't already filed. July 15th is the deadline. Dr. Friday, our financial consultant, and she is the best, will be joining us for the rest of the show, taking your calls and getting us up to speed on the very latest financial news right after this. Stay with us.